What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to do a breakdown of the BFL at Rocky Point. So the second BFL of the year, due to some rescheduling and stuff, the second BFL of the year was at Rocky Point, which is the Ohio River. The river was extremely high. It was like 25 feet, I think, and it was just dropping the whole week before the tournament. So the entire practice, the river was dropping really, really fast. So sometimes you could get into some areas, and then later on, like the tournament, you weren't going to be able to get into those areas. So it's important to pay attention to that, and it was important to pay attention to how the river was dropping as the practice ran along. But I pretty much was just fishing in the creeks. I didn't really see many people fishing the main river. I'm sure there was some people that did. I know there were some people that ended up locking through and fishing down below the locks. But as far as my game plan, I was going to fish the creeks. I checked out a few different creeks, and I wanted to figure out whether those fish were still spawning or whether they were going to be post-spawn and just be fishing on the bank type stuff. But I ended up finding some fish on beds. They were spawning, so you'd see the fish on beds and you could cast something to it, and as long as they didn't know you were there, a lot of times you would get a bite. But some of those fish were a little bit harder to bite. Obviously, it was a little later in the year. I think it was June 7th. Those fish were still a few fish spawning with the fluctuating water and stuff. This spring's just been crazy, and found a few beds that I had marked. I found a few stretches of banks. The fish were just, honestly, the fish were pretty much biting wherever you wanted to catch them. They were biting pretty good in practice. It got a little tougher in the tournament, obviously. That's usually how it goes in a BFL. People catching them throughout practice. It's just how BFLs are. They're always biting in practice, and then tournament rolls around and they just shut off. But got a lot of bites in practice. I was able to kind of figure out some of the areas I wanted to fish. I really found 3 different creeks and ended up picking one creek and just stuck with it. I should have probably checked out some of the other stuff looking back, but I didn't want to spread myself out too much. I kind of wanted to pick one creek and just kind of go fishing. So we'll kind of go through some of the baits that I caught them on here in a little bit, but a wacky rig, a speed crawl, and in practice I got some bites on like a spinner bait, and then a buzz bait as well. And also in the tournament, I got a few bites on a black frog. So tournament started. I ended up, like I said, I picked one creek and started probably the first 3 hours. I really struggled. I couldn't get bit. My co-angler already had 2 in the boat, and they only have a 3 fish limit. So he was almost had a limit, and I couldn't even get a bite. And finally, I pulled up on one of the beds that I had marked and ended up catching that fish. And it was a decent fish, probably 13.5-inch fish, but just not the size that I needed. I never really got the size that I needed, but fished around a little bit more and threw at an area that I thought might have had a bed, but I didn't fish there in practice, so it's kind of just blind casting essentially to what I thought might have been a fish. And caught that fish, and that was 12.5, so I had 2, and then pulled up on this one little stretch of bank and caught 2 real quick. And it was actually a stretch of bank where I caught like spawning crappie on earlier, so that was kind of cool. Earlier I flipped in there with my speed crawl and I caught a great big crappie, and I flipped into the same spot and I had another crappie that was a little bit bigger on, and that was kind of cool. I came back through that stretch and caught 2 keepers in, honestly, it might have been back-to-back casts. I know I caught one and I did some retying and stuff like that, and then went and flipped in again, and I caught another one. So that was kind of cool. Speed crawl, like I said. And then I kind of just went fishing, and I got a lot of bites on my speed crawl and caught some fish. And the majority of my fish that I caught in the tournament were actually on a Zoom speed crawl, and just Texas rigged it. And I'll kind of go down through that stuff here in a little bit. So then once I had a limit, I picked up a frog a little bit just to see if I could get a big bite, and I had one bite that missed my frog, and it was a decent one. And I was kind of disappointed about that. And then later on, towards the end of the day, when I was fishing around like the release area, I ended up catching another one that was maybe 14 inches on my frog. So it helped me upgrade a decent amount, but I threw that bait a lot and never really caught much. So like I said, I think those fish were spawning. Couldn't really see them, but you would flip into areas where you would think that there would be a bed, and you would get bit. There was a couple of them that I actually saw, and I actually saw a great big one, and I don't know if it was a bass or not, but it was a big fish, and went back there in the tournament and never saw that fish. So I don't know. Could have been a carp, could have been a bass, not sure. But some of the baits that I used, like I said, I threw a Cinco. Threw that on 10-pound fluorocarbon with a 1/0 G Finesse Gamakatsu hook, and just a green pumpkin Yamamoto Cinco. Caught a couple keepers on that, but the majority of my damage came on a Texas rigged speed crawl, a Zoom speed crawl. It was just a green pumpkin speed crawl. Threw it on a 7-foot medium heavy Lew's Custom Pro rod with a Hypermag 7:5-to-1 gear ratio and 20-pound Berkeley fluorocarbon line. And I like to throw that rod for a lot of applications. I'll throw it for spinner baits. I'll flip. I'll do a lot of things with that 7-foot medium heavy. In any rod, honestly, is just a really good all-around rod. But I threw that with a 1/4 ounce TMO tungsten weight, and had that with a heavy cover flipping hook from Gamakatsu. That's a 3/0 hook, and a green pumpkin Zoom speed crawl. So pretty much standard for the river. Everybody throws it. It gets a lot of pressure, but it catches fish, so I still throw it from time to time. But like I said, 20-pound test, was able to get those fish out of some really thick stuff. I actually broke one off in some pads that I should not have been flipping. I think I was actually flipping 15-pound test at the time, but definitely should not have been flipping into those pads with what I had, and hooked into something. I never saw the fish, but it felt big, but obviously it's in the pad, so you never really know. And hooked into the fish, and it got me like wedged, and it was on there for maybe 10 seconds and then just snapped my line. And that was a bad deal. So started throwing braid on it after that, and was able to call one more time, fishing the edges of those pads. But I normally don't catch any fish in those pads, and this was kind of an exception, and I don't really know why. But in practice, caught some fish on a spring ding from Accent. It's just chartreuse and white, 3/8 ounce spinner bait with a orange blade on it, and it seems to work. A lot of times in the springtime it seems to work pretty good, but I threw that one on a spinner bait, Lew's Custom Light spinnerbait rod. It's a 610 medium heavy, and I threw that with a Custom Pro Lew's Custom Pro 7.5-to-1 and 15-pound test. So that rod works pretty good. I can skip it under some really gnarly stuff and get it out of there, and I like that a lot. But also in practice, I had some bites on a buzzbait. It was a buzzbait that's made by Big Tails. It's a pretty good buzzbait for the river and pretty good buzzbait for pretty much anything, but just a 1/4 ounce black buzzbait from Big Tails, and I threw it on the same rod and reel as this combo that I threw the spinnerbait on. And finally, for my frog fishing, I had a 50-pound Sunline FX2 with a custom pro reel, and that's a 7:5 to 1 gear ratio, and I threw that on the Magnum grass rod, which is a 7.2 heavy. So it's got a lot of backbone to it, and I'm able to get those fish out of some thick stuff if I need to. But all in all, the river was really fluctuating. The river went from extremely high to dropping the entire practice, and then we got a big storm at the end of the day in practice, and at the end of the day Friday in practice, and it brought some of that water up. I know some of the Kentucky creeks got a little bit more rain than we did. When I actually got stuck in it in practice, and it was a pretty nasty storm, a lot of lightning and a lot of heavy rain. But the rain didn't do much for messing up like the watercolor and stuff like that, but it did start raising the water. So it'd been dropping the whole time in practice, and then it starts rising. Not sure if that helped or hurt the bite, but it just changed essentially from the way we had spent the entire practice. So little bit different, little bit changing conditions, and luckily the fish kind of turned on there a little bit more towards the afternoon or midday or whatever, because first thing in the morning I was really struggling, but ended up having like 6 pounds 3 ounces or something like that, and had a limit, cold once or twice I guess, and it was a decent tournament. I finished 28th. Would have liked to had some of those bigger bites, like that one I broke off, or the one that missed my frog completely. But that's the way it is. Sometimes those fish miss, and not much you can do with it. But happy with my finish. I moved up to 6th place in the points. We have Lake Monroe coming up next, and then the super tournament at Tanner's Creek. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.